I had a few questions on some of my YouTube videos about mono and stereo, how you make a mono recording using GarageBand, and I thought I'd cover that one first. But somebody else also asked, what's the point of a mono reverb? So I thought I'd combine these two things because actually they are quite sort of interlinked. So on the iPad here, I've got my reggae sort of demo that I did about a year ago. You can see that on my channel. If you click top right on the little icon, you can see the making of this particular video, but and the links in the description box as well. So I've got this. Now, all of the sounds, all of the green tracks here, which are GarageBand's inbuilt instruments, are by default stereo channels. So the drums have got some stereo ambience. So when you listen to one of these instruments on a pair of headphones, and I do recommend you listen to this particular video on headphones because you can hear the difference more clearly between stereo and mono. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all answer the question of how you get a mono track on GarageBand, or a mono mix rather. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, actually, there are some pretty clear reasons why you'd want to do it. Not only for the stylistic things, so if I'm recording a load of gypsy jazz and I want it to sound 1930s, it's going to end up being mono. You can see some videos like that on my channel as well. I've done a gypsy jazz making of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these tracks to make a new mix. So let's just have a listen to the first 4 bars just so that you can get into memory what it is. So there's my sort of reggae thing. Now I'm going to merge, just select one of the tracks until I see the range of options that appears. I'm going to click merge. It then opens up a load of tracks here, so you can tick on the ones that you want to create the mix for. Essentially, I've got 1 or 2 tracks that are muted, where I sort of experimented with other sounds, so I'm not going to select those. And then I'm going to go merge. It makes a copy for you so you don't lose the original, but it's now going to open up this on another page. I'm just going to get rid of these, which were the sort of the earlier attempts at this. So I'm just going to delete that one, and I'm going to delete that one, which reveals just one track and an effects track as well, which I put on for things like master EQ, which is a very good way of sort of bumping up the level by using an effects track as well. So I'll just switch the effects track off, and then you'll hear basically the mix that you've just heard. And there we go. Now let's monoify it. Why would I want to do this? Well, my old mixing desk over here has got a mono switch on, so you can listen to things in mono. There's a reason it's there, and it's also a very good reason for making a mono mix on here. It's so that you can audition your track so that it sounds okay on something that's just got one speaker like this, my iPhone SE, the phone that everyone laughs at because it's bottom of the range. It could be an alarm clock. Could be all manner of mono things, and they do exist. If you've got a single PA speaker at a gig that you're just putting music through, you want to check that the music is going to work through one speaker only. Simple. So that's a good reason for making a mono mix, but also something dark like this, a bit of reggae, might sound quite cool as a mono file, so that you're really delving into that sort of late 60s, early 70s sort of Kingston sound. Of course, I'm using software instruments here, so it's not exactly going to set the reggae world on fire. But I'm going to add a track here, and I'm going to go and find the bass amp. And then where it says classic stack, I'm going to go clean and DI clean. DI is direct input or direct inject. Essentially, it's like plugging a bass guitar straight into a mixing desk, so there's no amp to colour it. There's no amplification, there's no colouring at all. So I've now got that there, and I'm going to copy this track. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, yes, I'll copy it first, and then I'm going to put it on this track so that the same track appears on that bass amp. Let's listen to the stereo one for a couple of bars. And let's listen to the mono one. Now, of course, the level is a little lower now. So I'm going to just bump up the level a bit so that we've got a similar level for both stereo and mono. Yeah, it's not far off. Now, with the software instruments on GarageBand, they will be engineered such that the stereo is always what's called mono compatible. So drum sounds, all the reverbs built into GarageBand, all the effects that are in stereo will all be summed to mono. So that is, you add left and right together so that essentially you've got one lump of sound which is the same on left and right. That's the definition of mono. Just single track that comes out over both of your speakers. Now, for my money, there's a little bit less top end there, but that's partly because of the amp preset that I'm using. Now, of course, we haven't got a DI box only. It's kind of a, there is a sort of tonal coloration here. But what I could do is just to ramp up the treble a little bit. Let's see what that sounds like. Versus the stereo. There's quite a difference there. So I'm actually going to go into plugins and EQ and visual EQ. And I'm actually going to only raise the top end a little bit. It's kind of approaching some semblance of similarity with that, with the EQ there. So that is a way of making a mono track on GarageBand. Now, we could get properly rank and creative here by putting this through a guitar amp instead. Let's see what happens now. Yeah, that sounds fairly rough, but it might work for that style of music. It might further detract from the original GarageBand sounds and actually make something that's completely sort of unique. Now, I did actually do that on on the original. I put some tracks, like the snare drum, I stuck through a guitar amp. Now, reverbs wise, somebody said, reverbs are always stereo. Isn't that the definition of reverb? Isn't it? And I suppose it is. You've got a single source, say your voice or, a musical instrument or, drumsticks together or whatever, in a building, and the building responds to that sound by having this sort of reflections from the walls, from anything. You can buy what are called impulse responses. If you go on a digital audio workstation where you've got Carnegie Hall, or you've got Birmingham Symphony Hall, or you've got the Grand Canyon, a particular grid reference, all of that, you can really get anything specific. Now, mono reverbs, yes, they very much exist, mostly with spring reverbs. Now, I've got my guitar amp set up here with a reverb. That is completely mono. GarageBand also has mono reverbs. So the spring reverbs that are built into the guitar amp simulators here are mono, because that's what it was originally. So if you want a mono reverb, unfortunately you do have to go through a guitar amp to get it. But the other thing you could of course do is to put your mix through the bass amp first and then add a reverb afterwards. or right, sorry, put a reverb on and then monoify it with your bass amp. There are so many ways of tricking GarageBand into getting any sound you want, and it's not like, no, you can't do that. It's, yeah, okay, just try that, try this, try the other. So there are lots and lots of different ways of doing it. Now, there is, on the guitar amp side, there is no such thing as a DI'd guitar. It's only the bass. So, for example, if I go to any of these lists here, distorted, processed, yeah, it's all sort of preset amp sounds. But we could, you could try anything. That's foul, but lovely. It's, you can do anything you like. The EQ on a guitar amp or a bass amp does really rather a different job to the EQ that you have on the channel, the visual EQ where you got your bass, middle and treble. But you can also tweak things like, if I go to the stereo one again, I'm just going to get my bass amp back up. Now let's have a look. Bass. There we go. Go to DI clean. So now I've got my mono track back as I'd kind of want it. There are other EQs that you can apply. Now we've got the visual EQ at the moment here, which has sort of, I can lift my top end up there to try and compensate for the bass amp simulator. But there are other things. If I go to, here we go, none. We have audio unit extensions which you can download. So AU. EU. There we go. There are some equalizers here as well where you can actually get a little bit more specific. It's not sort of the visual sort of pretty picture that we had. This is just a bit different. Oh, it doesn't work. It's just trying to find the... So, type parametric. Maybe I'd want a high shelf here. There you go, I can just whack a load of 24 dB of gain. That's a lot actually, at 8.5 kilohertz. 8.5 kilohertz upwards, that's what a high shelf is. It means you've got a frequency that it specifies at 8.5K, above which it gradually ramps up to a shelf. So it's not all, the gain just doesn't run away with treble. So, and that's basically like how a hi-fi amp works. So I've now got myself a mix that's mono with plenty of top end, loads going on. Now, if you also have the plugin Final Touch, you can convert that into a mono file as well. But of course, that means spending more money. Whereas if you can do it all within GarageBand, great. But Final Touch, which you can see the link for in the description box and above, is a fantastic way of mastering your own GarageBand tracks. And you can literally you can share it straight into the app, so you don't have to sort of fool about with any storage or anything like that. And there we go. So there is a sort of a relationship between the reverbs and the mono and stereo thing. Digital reverbs, you used to be able to, I've got my quad reverb up there, you could have mono in and mono out. So you can get a sort of studio quality reverb that's got mono in and out. But generally speaking, we always have a stereo reverb, which is why it's the default here on GarageBand. So there we go.